In the pursuit of knowledge and understanding, humanity has been led down paths of wonder and peculiarity. Through space expeditions and ocean explorations, the human race has found fascination. But within the confines of our very own history, there lies a world so sinister and strange that it evokes questions about the very nature of our reality. Number 10. Since man began to unearth secrets of our collective past by excavating forgotten cities and lost burial chambers, something morbid yet fascinating emerged. In ancient times, the civilizations shared the common belief of the afterlife, leading them to honor the deceased in the most intriguing of ways. The pyramids of Egypt are believed to serve the primary purpose of grave sites. Specifically, they're used as elaborate tombs for the greatest pharaohs. Ancient Egyptian culture wouldn't just bury its kings and queens, though. They would mummify them, a practice that would no doubt be frowned upon today. By definition, mummies are the embalmed, preserved, and treated corpses of the deceased. Often, the process sees the removal of the internal organs before the remaining cadaver is wrapped in linen badges and resin. The practice was found to be prevalent across many cultures, not just in Egypt. Mummies have been found in South America with the Chinchorro culture, in Libya, various regions of Asia, Australia, the Torres Strait, and in Europe, where bodies were preserved using the more natural method of peat bogs. Of course, each ancient society has its own method of mummification, but generally there was one common trait: the removal of organs. In 1971, though, one bizarre and perception-shattering discovery was made. It was the corpse of an ancient Chinese noblewoman, Xin Shui, who's also known as Lady Dai. That year, while workers were digging close to an air raid shelter near Changsha, a never-before-seen funnel crypt revealed itself. When archaeologists and historical experts were called to the site, they unearthed over 1,000 precious items, including makeup, hundreds of pieces of lacquerware, and 162 wooden figures presenting the noblewoman's servants. Additionally, there was a meal prepared that would accompany Xin Shui to the afterlife. Archaeologists dated the site to just over 2,000 years old, making the integrity of the intricate structure all the more impressive. But the most astonishing and disquieting discovery was still to come. Eventually, experts unearthed the mummified corpse itself and sent it in for further examination. During physical studies, Shui's condition was found to be impossibly remarkable. For a corpse of just over 2,000 years old, she still had the skin of a living person, soft to the touch with elasticity. All of her original hair was found in place, including that on her head, nostrils, eyebrows, and even her eyelashes. Things only got stranger from there, though. While conducting an autopsy, it was found that her veins still housed type A vital fluid. They also showed signs of clots, leading to the establishment of her COD, a heart attack. Shui's body also exhibited other ailments, from gallstones and liver disease to high cholesterol and blood pressure. Despite having passed in 163 BC, Xin Shui's body exhibited condition of the recently deceased, leaving archaeologists searching for answers. During their quest for understanding, though, Lady Dai's body began to deteriorate, which would also lead them to their answer. Researchers credited the airtight tomb in which the noblewoman was buried as the reason behind her immaculate preservation. Number 9. In 1873, 20 miles from Jerusalem, an extensive cave was found lying southeast of Beit Shemesh. British explorers mapped the Teomim Cave, a large karst cave strewn with evidence of a past life, evidence that the initial explorers failed to declare. It was only this decade that the sinister purpose of the Teomim Cave would be revealed. Archaeologists and cave experts began to explore the inner chambers, finding some rather curious items. There were fragments of 3 human skulls, 120 oil lamps, pottery vessels, and Bronze Age weapons, some of which dated back far further than the oil lamps. Experts were able to date the artifacts to the late Roman period. Each item had been meticulously arranged, hidden within the rock's crevices, leading to an ominous speculation based on already known concepts. In the Greco-Roman world, historians came to discover that deep pits, such as the one that drops 300 feet into the Teomim cave, were understood as being the gateways to the underworld. According to historical evidence collected over the years, there was almost always a local oracle in every city of the Greco-Roman world. This outlook would lead to the performance of necromantic rituals in which mediums of the ancient world consulted the spirits of the deceased. Rituals such as this one usually involved items such as oil lamps, a reflective surface such as water held in a bowl, human skulls, and metal implements that were allegedly used to repel an unwanted presence. The archaeologists were suggesting that this area of the Teomim cave was used as a portal to the underworld. The writings on the walls of the cave were reminiscent of dark arts practices. Based on these findings with the shrines and oracles, experts revealed that the users of the cave viewed the shaft as a path to the underworld, from which the long past could rise and communicate with the living, and many people from the era would make use of it, hoping for guidance from their ancestors or to commune with the gods. Whichever it was, the underworld concept remains a sinister narrative of a forgotten time. Number 8. On a small island known as Chapelle d'Amheux off the coast of Guernsey, something truly strange was unearthed. In September of 2017, an archaeological dig was carried out for 3 weeks, only to reveal something that no one would expect: the remains of a sea creature. After happening across a carefully cut grave hidden within the sand, the archaeologists expected to find the skeleton of a human, or maybe even a secret treasure. But what they found instead was so unexpected that it left researchers scratching their heads. Inside the intentional grave was a porpoise with 2 holes drilled into its head, likely the markings of hungry rats. The creature had seemingly been given a proper burial in the earth. Radiocarbon dating placed its burial somewhere between 1416 and 1490, right within the time frame of the darkest historical period. Porpoises were considered a high-status food during medieval times, and sometimes served as a substitute for venison. This makes the burial even stranger, considering the length that someone had gone just to bury an animal that was viewed as nothing more than food. Some researchers suggested that the marine mammal was simply placed within a sandy storage unit, but that guess was only washed away when considering the present features. The body of the porpoise was positioned east to west as per Christian tradition. The digging of the hole was precise and intentional, revealing its purpose of a solemn resting place. Given the state of the gravesite, it was clear that this wasn't just a disposal, it was a funeral. The intriguing mystery of the medieval porpoise grave didn't end there either. Not long after its discovery, a second bizarre find was made. In the same place, on the tiny island in the English Channel, the remains of a medieval monk were also found. The researchers had spotted a toe bone emerging from the dust and began digging. Eventually, they unearthed the clear picture of a 5-foot-tall human, a monk believed to be from the neighboring monastery. Again, the grave was precisely cut, and the man was laid to rest in an east-to-west direction, implying another Christian burial. Buttons from his clothing were present, as was an injury to his head. Among the details, though, something was missing. The monk had no hands. Researchers were unable to determine how or why the religious figure's hands had been removed, but it wasn't the only unusual aspect. Bizarrely, each skeletal feature was left in varying states. The toes were in great condition, yet the pelvis, which is solid bone, was not. Again, the same archaeologists were left scratching their heads. They now not only had a purposed grave, but a helpless monk in close proximity. Number 7. The Middle Ages weren't the only time marred by disturbing practices. The Neolithic period was a time of agricultural development, a transition from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle that saw our ancestors form farming communities. Animals were being domesticated, crops were being planted, and villages were being formed. Although that sounded like a peaceful endeavor, there was still brutality and violence present in the transformation. According to historical studies, Neolithic farmers cannibalized their enemies, often engaging in systematic cannibalism against the entire family of rivals. These transformed societies also took to burying the deceased inside their homes, beneath platforms where the inhabitants slept, or in the walls that surrounded them. With the new practice of animal domestication, infectious diseases ran rampant. Violence and conflict saw the destruction of entire families, and warfare laid waste to whole communities. The Neolithic era was macabre, a term used to describe one connected archaeological discovery from the 2010s. It was in 2012 when a 2-meter-deep circular pit was discovered by chance. It was ancient, dating back 6,000 years. It sat undisturbed in northeastern France. Following the find, archaeologists and anthropologists flocked to the site, hoping to end the question of what these deep pits were once used for once and for all. Researchers had previously surmised that the deep pits were silos used for grain and cereal storage, whereas others argued that they were receptacles for the bodies of those deemed unworthy for proper burial. Disturbingly, the excavations would hold evidence for both sides. The study was being overseen by a surveying company in advance of property development. During the excavation, a 5-acre area was uncovered, pot-marked with silos. The team uncovered 60 pits altogether, 14 of which all contained human bones. But one silo in particular, Pit 157, was different from the rest. It was the oldest out of them all, dating back to just over 5,300 years. This one contained 7 severed upper limbs, including the arms, hands, and fingers, becoming known as the Pit of Arms. One of the 7 limbs was believed to have come from a young person, and all of them showed evidence of amputation marks that were made with some sort of sharpened object. After discarding the 7 limbs into the pit, 7 other people, whose arms were mostly still attached, were thrown on top of the arms. One of them was found to be a middle-aged man, with one arm missing. He'd sustained several blows to the head, the likely cause of his demise. The presence of the severed limbs, and even one silo that was filled to the brim with bodies, suggests an unexpected violence. Researchers found that most of the victims had suffered extensive, violent trauma. They were believed to be farmers or herders from the villages, living a simplistic life before meeting a grisly end. These weren't the only pits of human remains found in France either. Upon the request of the French state, one archaeological team from the National Archaeological Research Institute headed to the municipality of Aachen. They were asked to excavate a site where over 300 ancient silos stood. Within the large Neolithic compound, surrounded by a V-sectioned ditch with bastions at the entrances, were a few of the same structures that were found in Bergheim. One of them, numbered 124, was found to be much larger than the other pits, measuring 8 feet in diameter, and was also set aside from the rest. Within it were 6 skeletons with numerous broken bones, fractured legs, hands, feet, ribs, and mandibles. In addition to full bodies, there were also a few severed arms discovered within. Some had been cut in the middle of the humerus, believed to be viewed as war trophies from society that couldn't even fight back. Researchers revealed that both massacres dated back to the Neolithic period, suggesting a never-before-seen level of violence and brutality. Number 6. Burials in the ancient world were far more intriguing than what we see today. Our ancient ancestors weren't placed in the ground with a simple stone to commemorate them. Instead, they were shrouded in secrecy and mystery, with only carved figurines, historical texts, and connected artifacts offering clues as to their identity. The more notable figures of the bygone era were memorialized in a more eccentric way. In massive pyramids or intricately carved coffins with items, food, riches, and jewelry being buried with them for the afterlife. On the very rare occasion, researchers will happen across such burials of notable figures, who, despite the clues, remain unidentified. Such was the case in August of 2023, when excavation efforts in Pakopampa uncovered a high-ranking figure whose identity remains shrouded in mystery. Archaeologists were forced to dig through 6 layers of ash and black earth before finally reaching the remains. Upon unearthing the body, 2 seals and some sacred offerings were immediately obvious. The seals were coated in ancient ritual body paint, indicating that whoever was below the dirt was of elite status. One of the seals featured an anthropomorphic face looking east, while the other was a jaguar facing west. Another artifact represented the 5 fingers of a hand. The experts involved with this project had never seen so many seals in one ancient grave, suggesting that he was an immensely important person. With no confirmed identification, the skeleton was named the Priest of Pakopampa. The Priest of Pakopampa's burial was certainly peculiar. The size of his tomb, measuring 2.2 yards in diameter and 3.2 feet deep, was out of the ordinary. The position of the body had also never been seen before. He was lying face down on his stomach, with one half of his body extended, arms open, and his feet crossed. When Japanese researcher Yuji Seki first saw the priest, he declared that in his 43 years of research in Peru, he had never seen such a position. Ceramic bowls with geometric designs carved into them were found in the burial site too, along with a pin made from bone called tupu that was used to hold ponchos or cloaks. Believed to be a high-ranking leader, it's guessed that he ruled during 1000 BC, during the period of what was known as Pakopampa I phase. It's speculated that he was one of the first ever priestly leaders of the temples in the area. The Priest of Pakopampa was found during an archaeological project that's been ongoing since 2005. Since then, and until now, several other high-ranking burials have been found, including the Lady of Pakopampa, the Priest of Serpent Jaguar of Pampopampa, and the Priest of Putatos. Despite each of these figures being notable individuals, leaders, or elites of some sort, their identities remain ominously shrouded in mystery. Number 5. Primitive burials weren't always amicable, with the Pit of Arms lending credence to that fact. Just when you thought the Neolithic period couldn't possibly get any darker than severed arms and lifeless bodies being thrown into a massive pit, archaeologists from the Collaborative Research Center would find something even more disturbing: a 7,000-year-old mass grave. It was 2022 when the group of experts headed to a Neolithic settlement site situated in Vrabel, Slovakia. It was a routine project with dusting and chipping away at the hard earth to uncover what secrets lay beneath. They may have expected to find old pottery, ancient tools, fallen settlements, skeletal remains, but what they found beneath the several layers of earth would send chills down their spines instead. The site is known to be the largest Stone Age settlement ever found in Central Egypt, dating between 5250 and 4950 BC. The 50-hectare site has yielded much evidence of what the Neolithic period may have been like in Central Europe. But this particular discovery has been the most dramatic and most daunting of them all. While investigating a long ditch near one of the 6 entrances, bone after bone after bone began to appear. Eventually, most of the dirt was removed, and there lay in a haphazard manner, thrown carelessly into the mass grave, were 36 people, or 35 to be exact. Their arms and legs were outstretched, with some coming to rest on their backs and others on their sides. Men, women, and children of all ages, a good number of whom were adolescents and young adults. But there was something even more disturbing about their ages. The skeletal remains were all headless. The only head fragments found were of one skull and one mandible. It was clear that the heads had been separated from the body, with signs that they'd been decollated just mere moments before their demise. This was a full-blown massacre. Upon further investigation of the site and the disturbing scene as a whole, archaeologists drew upon the speculation that this may have been a result of something more sinister than just conflict and war. They believed that this was a cult sacrifice. Further excavations are still underway to determine if the occupants of the mass grave met their untimely demise together, or if this was the disposal following several ceremonial routines. Number 4. Not only were the Dark Ages full of macabre folk and uncivilized practices, but it was also a time when various types of punishments were being brought into existence. When people didn't abide by the newly established laws and rules, action was necessary. The self-appointed authority figures sought to ensure that no one stepped out of line. ultimately birthing various torture devices and methods. Some of the outlandish techniques included rat torture. It was no doubt a disturbing time. So in 2016, none of the archaeologists were shocked to find that their sinister discovery actually dated back to the 7th century. It was that year that the plans for the new National Opera House and Library were completed. The construction began in downtown Athens in Greece, during which a harrowing sight was unveiled. Once the construction team realized that they'd hit something crucial, archaeologists were brought in. There, they discovered the Phaleron Delta necropolis, a large ancient graveyard that was buried beneath centuries of dust and dirt. The cemetery itself dates from between the 8th and 5th centuries, a period of unrest for the Athenian community. It was during this time that aristocrats and nobles were engaged in strenuous and violent battles. The cemetery no doubt would have been filling up with bodies during this time. But there was something more sinister than just multiple burials here and there. As they continued to dust away the dirt, archaeologists soon drew upon a spine-chilling sight. There were 80 skeletons, all placed in one massive grave. The discovery got even more disturbing when experts realized that each of the skeleton's arms was bound above their heads, and their wrists were all tied together. At first, it appeared that this was nothing more than yet another violent execution method, possibly of slaves or common criminals. But a closer look at the details revealed that these victims may have been more than they seemed. They were placed carefully on the ground, lined up alongside one another in a neat row. Their legs, though, were twisted, and their jaws hung open in a never-ending scream. They had all met their grisly ends in the same manner, yet there was a level of respect in their burial, leaving experts wondering about the identities of the mass grave's shackled skeletons. Given the cemetery dates back to a time of tension, one of the strongest theories about the remains is that it was a failed coup. Experts suggested that the bodies in this sinister field were young, all of whom were in good health. They also believed that they were supporters of the Athenian noble and Olympic champion Cylon, who staged a coup in 632 BC with the help of the tyrant Megara. The coup, they believe, was a failure that sent Cylon into hiding, while the people who backed him were slaughtered. Archaeologists hope that with DNA testing, they may confirm this intriguing yet disturbing narrative. It was clear that these people had perished violently and torturously. Yet, most mysteriously, they were all placed into their mass grave with consideration and respect, a detail that is not consistent with the treachery of the Dark Ages. Number 3. Following the Renaissance and Age of Discovery, the start of the modern period began in the 17th century. Despite being a time of advancements, particularly in the scientific field and exploration, ethics were not yet established. This rang true when it came to one particularly gruesome discovery in Harvard University's Houghton Library. It was here that the book Destinies of the Soul was being held. It was written in the 1880s as a meditation of the soul and life following expiration. Once it was published, the volume's first owner would be the French physician and bibliophile, Dr. Ludovic Bouland. Through the years, the book made its way from person to person, before finally finding its way into the Harvard Library in 1934, where it lay untouched until some intrigued researchers began to study it, and what they found was truly horrifying. The book's first keeper, Bouland, had the book bound in a type of leather material. He felt that the book was about the human soul and deserved a covering that matched it. When the book was officially donated to the library, those researchers sought to determine just what that material was, which may have given them answers as to why he chose it. That horrific discovery was that the binding was not leather at all, but was instead human skin. Bouland had, without consent, taken the skin of a recently deceased and unclaimed female patient from the French psychiatric hospital where he had been working. Supposedly, the woman passed away from natural causes, and Bouland saw the opportunity to make use of her for the book that he received directly from the author. We know that the physician had done this because he left a note behind, right in the volume, that detailed his grotesque endeavor. The handwritten note explained his reasoning, and wrote that he specifically did not decorate or stamp the new binding because he wanted to preserve its elegance, it being the skin of the unknown woman from the facility. The translated note instructed the new owner to look carefully at the binding to see how the pores become all the more obvious. Buland goes on to say that he just kept this one piece of skin, taken from the back of the woman, interested in seeing how it changed according to preparation methods. The physician also described how he prepared the binding, a practice which he called anthropodermic bibliopagy. Anthropodermic bibliopagy was a 16th century practice where doctors used skin to bind their books in their own collections or upon request by state officials who wanted to use skin of executed criminals. But this practice had been done away with for at least a century, making Buland's decision all the more disturbing. In 2014, the Destinies of the Souls covering was tested again, confirming a grotesque truth, and it was then that the ethics of this were called into question. The decision was made to remove the skin from the book, and it was placed in temporary storage as efforts to identify who it belonged to continue. The binding no longer resides in the Harvard Library collection due to its ethically fraught nature, the book's origins, and the history that followed. The core problem, researchers and authorities believe, was that the doctor did not see a whole person in front of him, but rather something that he could use for his own amusement, and carried out an odious act of removing a slice of an unclaimed human being, secretly and without consent. Number 2. From around 800 AD to 1066 AD, the Viking Age wreaked havoc upon the world. The period saw several groups of Scandinavian people known as Vikings and Norsemen traveling to parts of Europe and beyond, trading, exploring, settling, raiding, slaying, and slaughtering. It was a time of violence and conflict, and most victims of the Norsemen's wrath didn't even see it coming, making them ill-prepared for the brutality that came. But it seemed that not all the Vikings were as victorious as we may have believed. It was 2009 when the Weymouth Relief Road was being constructed. As the construction crews began digging into the dirt, bony fingers, toes, and eventually skeletons began to emerge. It was quickly realized that they had uncovered something that had never been seen before, and soon experts were being brought in to examine the find. Archaeologists headed to Dorset's Ridgeway Hill to see what all the fuss was about. It was a mass grave. Piled on top of one another were 54 skeletons, all of which were Scandinavian, leading to the conclusion that they were Vikings. Each victim of this violent massacre showed signs of repeated and extensive trauma, inflicted with a bladed weapon. The discovery got even more disturbing when a separate pile of skulls was found next to the pile of human remains. They'd been decollated, their heads removed and tossed into a grave separately. But this wasn't the end of the troubling finds. When archaeologists began counting the skeletons and skulls, they found that out of 54 skeletons, there were only 51 heads. 3 of them were ominously missing. Researchers speculate that the missing heads may have been those of high-ranking individuals, possibly leaders of this Viking group. As more details became apparent, they began to theorize about what may have happened here. Given that the remains belonged to men of ages ranging from late teens to 25, they concluded that they may have been mercenaries who were engaged in a brutal battle that saw their untimely demise. It was that conclusion that brought them to the idea that these skeletons were victims of the St. Brice Days massacre of 1002, a little-known historical event that took place following the crowning of King Ethelred. This theory, though, came with issues, but the most damning was the lack of evidence. Studies done on actual St. Brice's Day victims showed evidence of a frenzied mob attack, whereas the Ridgeway Hill Vikings were systematically executed, with their hands showing indications that they'd been braced against something upon their demise. They had been quickly beheaded from the front and subsequently tossed into the pit, putting an abrupt stop to their violence. Questions still surround the identity of the Headless Vikings of Dorset. Number 1. It was the 11th of December 2002, a bit past 7 p.m., when calls began to flood into the police department in Surrey, England. Residents who were driving along the A3 had witnessed a treacherous car crash. A car had supposedly swerved off the road with its headlights ablaze, driving through the underbrush, and flown off the embankment before coming to an abrupt stop right on the side of the highway at Burfa. The passers-by were concerned for the driver and quickly began making their calls, hoping for a speedy response. The number of calls alone was enough to send various police officers clamoring to the cars, flashing their lights, and racing to the scene. But when they arrived, they found something inexplicable. There was no crash. The underbrush, thick and tall, showed no signs of a disturbance. There was no crashed car, no wreckage, no debris at all. It was completely deserted. The officers were understandably confused. They'd received numerous independent calls reporting the accident. Together, they began driving along the A3 in search of a crashed car. Eventually, they found something. Deep in the brush, nose down, with a shattered windshield and a smashed driver's door, was a maroon vehicle, a Vauxhall Astra. It didn't take long for the police to find the driver, who lay unmoving not far from the car itself. There was something amiss about the entire scene, though. Firstly, the driver was already reduced to a skeleton, and the car was somewhat overgrown. Further analysis revealed that this car and its driver had been here for 5 months, since July. They also managed to identify the driver as a missing man, 21-year-old Christopher Chandler. He was last seen in Hounslow in West London, where he was out with friends. No one knew he had driven off to Surrey, and even though he'd been reported missing by his brother, the police had no idea where to start looking. It wasn't until the calls of a ghost crash that he was finally located. It was surmised that he'd suffered serious injuries, leading him to crawl out of the passenger door. He ultimately succumbed to his wounds as he tried to ascend the steep hill to get help. While the identity of the driver was confirmed, a mystery still remains in the Surrey car crash. Several people had witnessed the scene 5 months after it happened. The infamous A3 ghost crash turned into a seriously grim discovery. It was as though, in a paranormal sense, the accident was replaying over and over again until Christopher was found and laid to rest. Today, experts still wonder what happened here. Did the road users really see Christopher's crash in a paranormal manner? Or was some strange coincidence at play here? Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.